which will cause a null pointer exception to occur. Okay, we're running low on time here. Attempt to reference it is that one. A lot of the others are really close to things that can cause null pointer exceptions, but don't necessarily. This one always causes a null pointer exception. That was the answer. Here's a class. When onClick is called, a null pointer exception will be thrown. That's not me asking you, that's me telling you. Could you tell by the tone of voice in that statement? Okay. How would you fix it? Circle 1. Well, first thing we should do is look at this question and say, why on earth is a null pointer exception being thrown, right? So, a little bit of confusing code. I know I kind of said I was trying to shy away from that. Trust me, this is way less confusing code than I put on tests in the past, as you've seen during your studying, right? Okay, that's my attempt. Yeah, Yo City. That's my attempt to justify myself. Well, when you call onClick, is it wrong to pass in an int x and an int y? No. If they're less than 0, we throw a new runtime exception. Is that a null pointer exception?
No.
Not necessarily, no. Plus, okay. So int I, av.teleportxy. What does that do? Teleports the avatar. Why does that cause a null pointer exception?
You never initialize the member variable.
Yeah, you see how we're using a dot here? Whenever you use a dot, that's probably where your null pointer exception is. Now, really what you do is you look at the call stack and you see what line it says has the problem, and then you look for a dot, and then you look for what's before the dot, and that usually is set to null. Now, wait a minute. I initialized it right there. How could it possibly be null? Well, I initialized this local variable called avatar AV, which is shadowing this member variable with the same name. The reason for this question is I have seen this so many hundreds of thousands of times in people's code that I wanted to get it through your head. Hey, if you get a null pointer exception, this might be what you did. Okay, so how do you fix it? Notice there's a space right here. I didn't make that super clear, but not that that's super important. But remove avatar and background from the constructor. What I'm saying is, hey, if you got rid of those types, now you're actually initializing the member variables rather than the local variables, which means that when you get down here, this isn't null and the problem is solved. Admittedly, it's kind of an obscure question, but, well, it was on previous tests, and this was the answer, and it's only one question. Let's move on to the next one. Concurrent modification is thrown when? Nope. That one. Okay. Consider this nonsensical code. I'm sorry for nonsensical code. I hate those questions. I hate professors that use those questions. But how do you test knowledge of code without, I mean, if you make it too obvious what it does, then they just read what it does and then they use their intuition. I have to have nonsensical code for testing purposes, I claim. At least as far as I know how to write tests, that's what I do. Okay. Of the 10 commented lines, which 2 contain errors the compiler will catch? 8, if t is equal to null. Now there's a static toppings t here. Why is that wrong? I claim that works. 9, however, has a this.s. And this does not exist inside of a static method. So I claim there will be an error right there. This.b is null. Now wait a minute, there's a b right here. Is that okay? But it's not inside of this class, so this.b is a compile error, and this.s is also a compile error. This one because static, and this one because local. So the correct answer was 5 and 9. And if you reverse it so you can sing the Dolly Parton song, that's a thing. Not going to happen. Okay. In the following code, use overriding to implement an isTube method that returns true if and only if the sprite instance used to call the method is a tube. Okay, we did talk about overriding. We didn't talk about it as much as we talked about abstracts. So most of you did it with abstraction, and if it would have worked, then I tried to give you most of the points. Took off a couple for not doing what it said, which is use overriding. See how I boldified it? So that kind of says use overriding. What is overriding? Do you remember?
The same signature but a different body.
Yes. Overriding is when a child class has a method with the same signature, and it replaces the one in the parent class. So here's how you do it. Sprite. Boolean. By the way, a lot of people wrote bool. That's cool. In C++, it's called bool. In Java, it actually has to be Boolean or it won't compile. I don't care if you didn't know that, but you now know that it's called Boolean. I think that's dumb. I wish they'd change it to bool because every other language just uses bool. Boolean is sprite. Wait, what am I doing? Is tube. By the way, my wife called me on it and said, "Why do you call them tubes? They're pipes. Don't you know he's a plumber?" And I realized she's right. I got to switch to pipe, but tube is so ingrained in my head now, can't get away from tube. Okay, how are we going to implement this? Well, we're going to override it anyway, so we don't really need any logic. We can just say, return false. This was the expected answer. And then we need to override it because we haven't used overriding yet. We've just made a method. Now we'll say Boolean is tube. And here we're going to override it by saying return true. That's the answer. Whenever you find yourself doing something complicated, probably not right. A lot of people did stuff like logic. If I am a tube, type tube, then return true, else return false. What's wrong with that? Yeah, so it's not exactly wrong. It's just, well, how do you determine if you're a tube? You're kind of you're asking the question in the question. So there's this recursive problem if you didn't provide a way to do that. There is this instance of tube, and if you actually knew how to use instance of, that was cool. But, you know, I wish you'd just do what I said to do, which is use overriding, and all you really have to do is return true. So most people that had a lot of logic there, I basically derived from that you kind of didn't really know how to do what I was asking, and that's the point of a test, is to see if you know how to do what I'm asking. So this is what I wanted. And this brings us to the end of the test, and now I'll really pass them back. Yes?
Do you actually want to use overriding on my shadowing?
So that's an interesting question. Isn't overriding a lot like shadowing? Kind of, yeah. The reason shadowing is a bad practice is because it confuses the programmer and makes the programmer think they're initializing this variable when they're actually initializing that variable. In the case of overriding, it's kind of the opposite in that when you call isTube, it just does the right thing, like it goes to the right method. So I believe the general consensus is that overriding is a good practice and shadowing is a bad practice, but I certainly do see the similarity. I think the answer is that overriding is a good thing. Although, you know, if it's less confusing to you to have a bunch of logic here and not have multiple versions of the method, then that's kind of, well, easier to read is usually trumps using fancy tricks. Yes?